State budget was on. So we'll get to interest rates a little bit later. But the budget today, a $12 billion cash splash on Victoria's health system, plus more money on education and infrastructure. Do you reckon we needed to put more money into infrastructure? There seems to be a lot of infrastructure going on, and it seems to be blowing out. But did it hit the mark for businesses? What are we actually doing? What are people thinking, gee, this is great, I've got a small business and I've really, really benefited out of this? Have you? Let's ask an expert. Joining me now, Bill Lang is Executive Director of Small Business Australia. Bill, good evening and welcome tonight.
Yeah, g'day, Grubby. Thanks for speaking with us.
Bill, today's budget, I mentioned infrastructure, I mentioned health and all of that. Are you happy with today's budget?
I think the majority of small business families across the state, and there's about over 500,000 of them, Grubby, would be very disappointed. And I think most Victorians would be because, you know, we've had a couple of years, we've been locked down.
Belted.
We've walked around our local neighbourhoods and we've seen how run down things are. We still see many shops with for lease signs on them. And you go through the budget papers and there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages, and the word small business is probably mentioned 3 or 4 times out of hundreds of thousands of words. There's really nothing in there for small business families that they could say, yep, that's going to be positive, it's going to help me find some employees, going to help me encourage the customers to come back. The CBD of Melbourne's not mentioned in the budget papers based on our first read.
Yeah, Bill, are you surprised, given the disregard for small business during the whole pandemic situation when, you know, things were just shut down at the drop of a hat, and these were the people who we could see in front of our very eyes really, really suffering, and the incentives on getting things back and finding staff. And as you say, I'm still walking down good shopping strips, and seeing a lot of for lease signs. That's not just in Melbourne, but it's in country Victoria as well. But getting people back to the city, Bill, where's the love? I mean, there's something which could go on for a long, long time.
Look, you're right, Grubby, and if you think about it, there's something in the order of 50,000 Victorian white-collar public servants that work in the offices that prior to COVID were coming into the CBD 5 days a week. Yeah. And it does not cost the government of Victoria 1 extra cent of debt. Remember, like this government is at record levels of debt amongst any state in Australia in the history of Australia. Mm-hmm. It doesn't cost an extra cent to get those employees back into their offices and therefore, you know, further supporting the small business sector rather than over the last couple of years, they've all received pay rises and extra money to work from home. Yeah. It's just not fair, Grubby.
Yeah. And as I said, small business have been the ones that have suffered in front of our very eyes over the last couple of years. Staff shortages. Every time I go past a cafe, and this is why I always wonder, why is there unemployment at all? Because everyone seems to need staff. What's the government doing about that? Where's the incentive?
Well, that's, you know, it's not clear on the first read of the budget papers that there's any sort of direct support to make it easier for people to be working in those businesses. And secondly, you know, we've still got the handbrake on in terms of getting the international student base, you know, back to Victoria. Yeah. And that was a major source of, you know, part-time workers. Absolutely. As they worked a few hours a week. So there's a number of things there. But again, we don't see any core objective or strategy around it. You talk about a cash splash. In your introduction, Grubby, like we've got small businesses still financially drowning out there, and the government just wants to rack up more debt. It makes promises about things like hospitals in Melton. Well, they've already promised that in the past. Yeah. So a lot of this stuff is getting recycled. We're all that busy trying to keep our heads above water, but it's not so-called blowout. Everything they budget for costs more, takes longer, which means ultimately who pays for all of it? The property owners and the small business operators of Victoria. That's who's paying for it.
Sure. What would you have liked to have seen in the budget today, in addition perhaps, or taking away a few things, but specifically? Righto, Bill Lang, you're in charge. What would you have liked to have seen today?
Oh, look, Victoria needs to have the lowest taxes to start and operate a business and employ people in Australia rather than having the highest. And if you think about it, Grubby, we've got the highest population density of any state in Australia, yet we've got the highest costs for every imaginable public service. So we should be seeing a significant reduction in the number of head office, highly paid, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in public servants. We'd like to see some actual, key performance indicators so that they would start performing better and be more productive. Let's get more productivity out of, more quality work taking place rather than let's hire a whole bunch more and pay them more money.
There's a state election coming up in November, we know. Matthew Guy's back in charge of the Liberals. Where do you think he'll hammer the government on today's budget? Because he's going to come out and hammer it. What do you reckon he's going to have to say?
Well, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, Grubby, in reality. Blown-out debt, major projects running late, costing a lot more money, promises made and then not delivered, and whether that's to do with sort of suburban rail loop projects that they've got out to the never. He could sort of pick every second or third page, not to mention the Commonwealth Games. No one else in the world wanted the Commonwealth Games.
Yeah.
And yet the budget's saying they're going to spend $2.6 billion into marginal political seats. And it's like, if we're the so-called sporting capital of the world, why can't we have that $2.6 billion spent supporting small businesses and local jobs?
Seems the bleeding obvious. You should be executive director for the bleeding obvious, not Small Businesses Australia, Bill. But look, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. Just interested to know, this is the one that struck me. Dan Andrews said today he expects Victoria to be back in surplus 25-26. Are people going to believe that?
Look, I remember growing up and being told the story of Pinocchio and Geppetto. And, Geppetto, made Pinocchio and got to the stage where Pinocchio had a life of his own. I also remember they said, well, we stopped the East-West Link project because that's what people voted for. But what people voted for, Grubby, on that election was to stop it without having to pay a cent for it.
Yeah.
And so what did we get? It cost us $1.3 billion and we got nothing for it. So you've literally got to take all these big announcements, and they're very good at it. They run this publicity machine and bombard the citizens of Victoria with all these positive announcements. But where is the delivery on time, on budget? We're yet to see it on anything for the last 7 years of this government.
Yeah, I just felt it had a touch of the Bob Hawke, no Australian child will be living in poverty after 1990, that statement. It was a bit of a sweeping one, but maybe that's just me. What do you think? 133 693. Bill Lang, Executive Director of Small Business Australia. Thanks for talking to me tonight.
Thanks a lot, Grubby. The only people crying tonight are the small business families, unlike Bob Hawke back in the days of that big statement.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right, and they've had a lot to cry about the last couple of years. Good on you, Bill. Good talking to you.